Hey everyone, it is the morning of the Booker Shortlist announcement. Very exciting. Have you been reading any of the books on the long list? There's 13 books, or are you waiting for the shortlist to come out to give a few of the books a try? So far, I've read 8 and a bit books on the long list. I say a bit because I've read 100 or so pages of the Overstory, really enjoying it so far, and I'm eager to read the rest. But I didn't want to pressure myself to read all of the books on the long list, just because, then when you pressure yourself like that, then it becomes a task, and then reading doesn't become as fun as it should be. And so I've been reading other books while also reading books on the long list, and I think it's important to maintain a healthy reading diet. But I've wanted to film my short reactions to the books so far and give my predictions, or like my wish list of what I'm hoping will be on the short list before the announcement is made. It'll be made after 10 a.m. this morning on a live Facebook stream. So I'm going to try to film my live reaction to the live Facebook stream, but I don't know how technologically if that's going to work, but I'm going to give it a try. So this has been a really interesting year for the prize. There's been some controversy around books on the list, particularly the two genre books on the list. There's a crime novel long listed for the prize and a graphic novel. And this has raised a lot of questions about what books are worthy for the Booker Prize list and what does the Booker Prize mean. And this comes up again and again this year, but particularly because of these different sort of so-called genre novels on the list. And it makes sense that there's these books are on the list because on the judging panel there's a crime novelist and there's a graphic novelist. So of course they're going to be biased towards these kinds of books. And book prize panels are subjective and biased. That just always happens. No matter how well read or objective you try to be, you can't help but having been a bit biased, and so it makes sense. But I understand people's objections, particularly to a graphic novel being on the list, because it's a really different form of writing, and it would be like saying a book of poetry could be long listed for the Booker Prize. And so it makes sense that people have issues with it. But personally, I'm happy that it's on the list because it pushed me to read this book, and it's probably pushed a lot of people who don't often read a lot of graphic novels to give one a try, and maybe they would discover a whole other genre. And so I understand people's objections, and it makes sense. But to me, classification in books doesn't really matter so much. So there is a book like The Long Take on the long list also has a lot of lyrical language in it, and you could say is like a book of poetry. There's Washington Black, which you could call an adventure story. There is The Water Cure, which is a dystopian novel. And from what I've read of the Overstory so far, it is basically a book of short stories grouped under a theme of looking at the human life and human progression from a tree's perspective. And it's a bunch of different short stories of individual lives looking at that. And so you could say it's a book of short stories. But I think fiction's flexibility and changeable form is always interesting. So I'm happy to leave classification to the judging panel and the prize's rules to see what is actually eligible. And does that mean that these long-listed books are the best of the year? Well, probably not. There's definitely some books I would have liked to have seen on the list that weren't listed, but my opinion is subjective, just like the judge's opinion is subjective. And so, like I've said before, my love of following book prizes isn't necessarily to find the best book, but the interesting comparisons that can come up when books that are paired together that wouldn't be paired together otherwise. So on this long list, if you look at Washington Black and the Mars Room both highlight how the talents and the potential of large groups of the population are often wasted because of socioeconomic or racial or geographic circumstances that people are born into. So Washington Black shows the life of a young man with a lot of artistic and scientific talent who's born into slavery. And the Mars Room depicts the lives of different prisoners who have a lot of capability and potential, but they are forced to work for pennies per hour as they carry out different life sentences. And equally, I think it's interesting to compare the Mars Room with Sabrina for the way that they show this crisis in American culture when it's overrun by fear and paranoia, and particularly in Sabrina, how it shows tabloids and the news can turn popular opinions into agreed truth over clear-sighted facts. And then equally, if you look at books like Everything Under and The Water Cure, they show really different interesting ways of looking at gender and ask questions like, does being a man or a woman really affect the way that we relate to each other? Or are our gender identities more fluid than these socially imposed limitations? And also, both books ask really interestingly, like, what's the line between abuse and nurturing? And you can look at the books Milkman and Normal People. Although they take place in Northern Ireland and Ireland respectively, they both depict Irish women at their centres who feel so alienated from the Irish life around them that they want to escape into novels and are just reading all the time. And they both have male partners who refuse to define their relationships. And so what does this say about gender relations in Ireland today? And then there are questions like I talked about in my last wrap-up video of the idea of readability. And so like Washington Black, I found very readable, where large sections of Milkman I really struggled with. And then, like, if you look at Everything Under by Daisy Johnson, I found this book really difficult to get into, even though it's a relatively short book, whereas Normal People is much more like straightforwardly written, compulsively readable romance. And then there's like From a Low and Quiet Sea, which seems to be saying much larger things about our culture by looking at the lives of individual people in turn, in the same way that the Overstory seems to be saying a much larger message by looking at the lives of individual people. But in terms of length, Donal Ryan's novel is like quite short, whereas the Overstory is very long. And so this like question of readability and what do we want the Booker Prize to be? Like, do we want it to be a prize highlighting a book that everyone can go out and want to read the book compulsively, or should it be putting up a book and saying, this book is really special and it might seem challenging at first, but the rewards are so much more and it's a very important book that you should stick with and read all the way through because ultimately you really enjoy it. So I think all those questions are really interesting, and I enjoy how prizes bring these books together to make us ask these questions, because we should be asking how we read as well as like what we're reading. So enough pondering and going all into this. I'm gonna give what I hope will be on the shortlist before the actual announcement is made. I'm going to pick out of, this is just out of what I've read, obviously, and there's other books that I want to read on the list, like particularly In Our Mad and Furious City and Warlight and The Lawn Take. I'm really interested in reading The Lawn Take, but just haven't got to it yet. But what I hope will be on the shortlist is Washington Black, Everything Under, The Water Cure, The Overstory, Normal People, and From a Low and Quiet Sea. So that is my my wish list. I honestly admired so much about Milkman, but on the whole, I felt it was too long. It could have done with some editing, and there were sections which just sort of dragged for me. And then with like the Mars room, I questioned some things about the narration. I wish it had just been under like one person's story. But anyway, that's it for now, and I'll film again as the announcement is being made. Well, it is after 10 a.m. I've been following the Booker Prize's Facebook page and looking at their Twitter feed, and there's no mention of what the shortlist is, and I need to go to work now, so I may have to give my reaction on the fly, so we'll see how it goes. So the list was announced while I was walking to the train station, and I'm at the train station now. So Anna Burns is on the shortlist, and like I said, I had issues with this novel, but I think parts of it are so genius that I'm glad other people are going to be reading it and discussing it, so I'll be really interested to know what you think if you've read Milkman. So happy to see Washington Black on the shortlist. So many people are going to love this novel and really enjoy it. Everything Under, really interesting. Like I said, it was difficult to get into, but really interesting novel. Like at the end, it all came together for me, and I just loved it. So yeah, eager to see equally like what other people are going to think of this. Then the Mars room, like I said, I had sort of issues with parts of this, but I thought it was really interesting and had shows, you know, a different side of American life that a lot of people don't get to see. And the Overstory, I'll be interested to see how it plays out. I worry it might be one of those books that's more concept than the actual story. Like if some of the individual stories fall apart, will it actually come together? And then finally, like I said, The Long Take is one I'm really interested in reading. So I'm glad it's on the list because now I'll actually get to experience it and give my thoughts. So that is my train, which has just arrived. So I've got to go get it. Let me know your thoughts about the list. What you're eager to read, what you've read on the list that you really enjoyed, and what you were hoping to see on the list and which hasn't made it. So I'll speak to you again soon.